Look at your screen right now. Silver is gone, not expensive, not rallying, not in a bull market. Gone over the weekend. Reports flooded in from Dubai, from Shanghai, from Hong Kong. Physical silver, if you can find any, is reportedly trading at $91 an ounce. $91. Meanwhile, the paper price in Chicago closed Friday at $77. That's not a premium. That's not market noise. That's a fracture. That's the moment the illusion shatters and reality comes crashing through. 1 kilogram silver bars, the global standard for international trade, are showing sold out across major bullion dealers worldwide. Not limited availability, not call for pricing, sold out. But here's what no one in the mainstream financial media is telling you. This disappearance isn't random, it isn't chaos, it isn't some temporary supply chain hiccup that will resolve itself in a few weeks. This is strategy. This is the China shock. And it represents the opening salvo in an economic war that most people don't even know has started. You clicked on this video because you sense something is deeply wrong. You feel it in your gut. The move is too fast, too vertical, too coordinated. And you need someone to explain what's actually happening behind the headlines. Your Asian friend is going to answer that question today. I'm going to show you exactly what's unfolding and why it matters more than almost anything else happening in the world right now. What I'm about to reveal follows a pattern that has reshaped global power dynamics 3 times in the last century. And every single time, without exception, the nations that failed to recognize what was happening paid with their sovereignty, their prosperity, and their future. October 1973. The Arab members of OPEC announced an oil embargo against the United States and its Western allies. Within weeks, oil prices quadrupled. Gas lines stretched for miles across America. The most powerful industrial economy on Earth, the nation that had just put men on the moon, was brought to its knees. Not by missiles, not by invasion, not by military force of any kind, but by resource control. That embargo wasn't about making money on oil prices. It was about leverage. It was about demonstrating, with devastating clarity, that the West's entire way of life could be switched off like a light bulb by whoever controlled the critical inputs. The 1973 oil shock fundamentally reshaped geopolitics for the next 50 years. It transferred trillions of dollars in wealth. It toppled governments. It rewrote the rules of international power. Silver in 2025 is oil in 1973. But the stakes are infinitely higher. In 1973, oil-powered cars and heating systems in factories. Important, certainly. But today, silver powers the future itself. The semiconductors in every phone and computer. AI systems are reshaping every industry. The solar panels that governments are betting their entire energy transitions on. The 5G and 6G networks. The guidance systems in next-generation weapons, electric vehicles. The medical devices keeping patients alive. Silver isn't just a commodity anymore. It's the irreplaceable linchpin of 21st century technological civilization. And China knows it. They've known about it for years. And they've been acting on that knowledge while the West sleeps. While Western traders have been busy shuffling paper contracts, electronic promises backed by nothing but faith, China has been executing a completely different strategy. They've been acquiring the real thing, physical metal, hundreds of millions of ounces, quietly extracted from Western vaults, shipped east, locked away in sovereign reserves that no Western auditor will ever see. This isn't investment. This isn't portfolio diversification. This is weaponization. The world just entered a new phase of resource-based conflict. But most people remain completely oblivious. They're watching paper prices. They're listening to analysts who don't understand the difference between a futures contract and physical metal. Stay with me, because what comes next will change everything you think you understand about what's happening in the world right now. To understand what's really happening, you need to see how the magic trick works. For decades, for generations, really. The global silver market has operated on a magnificent illusion, a confidence game of staggering proportions. The paper market sets the price. The futures exchanges in New York and London determine what an ounce of silver is worth. And everyone, investors, miners, manufacturers, governments, central banks, accepts that number as reality. But here's the secret they desperately don't want you to know. The paper market and the physical market are 2 completely different universes. They follow different rules. They respond to different forces. And right now, in real time, they're violently diverging. The illusion is breaking. And once it breaks completely, it cannot be reassembled. Let me give you a number that should stop you cold. A number that reveals the absurdity of the current system. On Friday, one single trading day, the COMEX Futures Exchange traded 947 million ounces of paper silver. 947 million ounces in one day. Now let that sink in. Let it really penetrate. Here's the problem. The entire global silver mining industry produces approximately 820 million ounces per year. Every mine on every continent, every ounce extracted from the earth across 12 full months in one day. Traders exchanged more silver than the entire planet produces in a year. Read that again, sit with it. Let the implications wash over you. That's not a market. That's a casino. It's Fantasy Island. It's a game of musical chairs where there are 100 players scrambling for 3 chairs. And someone just unplugged the music. This is what we call the paper to physical decoupling. And it's accelerating faster than even the most aggressive predictions anticipated. The paper price says silver closed at $77. That's the number you see on financial news tickers. That's the number your brokerage account uses. That's the official reality. But in Dubai, in Shanghai, in the physical markets where real metal actually changes hands between real buyers and real sellers, silver is reportedly trading at $91. That's an 18% premium over the official price. Let me be absolutely clear about what that means. That's not a market inefficiency that arbitrageurs will quickly correct. That's not a temporary dislocation that will resolve in a few trading sessions. That's a market fracture, a fundamental break between two systems that are supposed to be connected but no longer are. And the fracture is widening by the hour. So, where did the silver actually go? Let me walk you through the forensics. Let me show you the crime scene, the vault drain, the COMEX, the primary U.S. futures exchange for precious metals, maintains registered silver inventories. These are the ounces theoretically available for delivery against futures contracts. This is the metal that's supposed to back up all those paper promises, the collateral that makes the entire system function. Over the past 3 years, those inventories have been systematically, relentlessly drained. We're talking about hundreds of millions of ounces drawn down, not a gradual decline, an accelerating hemorrhage. Month after month after month, the stockpiles shrink. The trend line points toward zero. The LBMA in London, same pattern. The vaults that once seemed inexhaustible, vaults that held the accumulated silver of generations, are bleeding metal at an unprecedented rate. But here's the critical detail that changes everything. This silver isn't being sold into the retail market. It's not flowing to coin dealers to meet investor demand. It's not showing up as inventory anywhere in the Western financial system. It's being removed from the system entirely, vanishing, disappearing, as if into a black hole from which nothing returns. The China pipeline. When a sovereign nation with $3 trillion in foreign reserves decides to accumulate a strategic commodity, they don't buy futures contracts, they don't play in the paper casino, they don't trust electronic promises from Western exchanges. They take physical delivery, they load the metal onto ships, they transport it across oceans, they store it in vaults on their own soil, vaults that appear on no Western balance sheet, that submit to no Western audit, that answer to no Western regulator, and once it's gone, it's gone. It doesn't come back. It doesn't re-enter the Western financial system. It's been permanently removed from the available supply. China has been running this exact playbook with gold for over a decade. Conservative estimates, and these are conservative, suggest China has accumulated between 20,000 and 30,000 tons of gold. That's far more than their officially reported reserves. They've built a massive strategic stockpile, while Western analysts dismissed the accumulation as routine central bank diversification. Those analysts were fools, or liars, or both. Now China is executing the identical strategy with silver, but with silver. The implications are exponentially more severe. Why? Because unlike gold, silver gets consumed, gold sits in vaults, it gets recycled, it moves from jewelry to bullion to jewelry again across centuries. The gold mined by the Romans, by the Spanish conquistadors, by the California 49ers. It's still circulating somewhere in the global system. Gold is eternal. But silver? Silver gets used in industrial applications. It gets embedded in electronics, soldered into circuit boards, layered into solar panels, dispersed in medical devices. It gets scattered in quantities too small to economically recover. Every ounce of silver that goes into a smartphone is effectively destroyed from a market perspective. It's gone forever, unrecoverable at any reasonable cost, and the industrial demand for silver isn't just growing, it's exploding. The import explosion. Let's look at the trade data, the hard numbers that tell the real story beneath the headlines. China's silver imports have surged dramatically over the past 24 months. We're not talking about modest increases. We're not talking about normal fluctuations in trade flows. We're talking about year-over-year jumps of 30%, 40%, 50%. Hundreds of millions of ounces flowing eastward in a relentless river of metal. Russia has been stockpiling aggressively, adding silver to their strategic reserves alongside gold. The BRICS nations appear to be coordinating their acquisitions, building collective reserves outside the Western financial system. But China is the apex predator in this hunt, the alpha accumulator, and unlike the others, China isn't just hoarding silver as a monetary asset or an inflation hedge. China needs silver. They need it desperately, insatiably, strategically. They're manufacturing more solar panels than the rest of the world combined. They dominate semiconductor packaging and assembly. They're racing to control AI infrastructure, 5G deployment, electric vehicle production. Every single one of these industries consumes silver voraciously. Every single one is central to their strategic plan for 21st century dominance. So what's happening isn't mysterious, it isn't random, it isn't a market accident. It's entirely logical, ruthlessly logical. Every single one of these industries consumes silver voraciously. Every single one is central to their strategic plan for 21st century dominance. So what's happening isn't mysterious, it isn't random, it isn't a market accident. It's entirely logical, ruthlessly logical. If you're China and you've decided to win the technology race at any cost, you don't just build factories, you don't just train engineers, you don't just invest in research, you secure the inputs, you lock up the supply chain at its most vulnerable choke point. You make absolutely certain that when the shortage hits, you're the one holding the stockpile, and your rivals are left scrambling for scraps like beggars at a feast. The structural deficit. Now let me show you why this situation cannot be quickly reversed. Why is there no easy fix? Why the trap is already closed? Global silver mine production runs approximately 820 million ounces per year. That's the supply side. Every mine, every country, every ounce extracted from the earth. But global silver demand, industrial consumption plus investment demand, now exceeds 1.2 billion ounces annually. And that demand is growing, not shrinking. That's a structural deficit of over 200 million ounces every single year, year after year, compounding, accumulating. Where does the difference come from? How has the market balanced supply and demand when there's a 200 million ounce gap? Recycling provides some, but recycling rates are limited by the dispersed nature of silver in industrial applications. The real answer, above ground stockpiles, the accumulated reserves of decades, the silver sitting in vaults, held by investors, stored by institutions, being drawn down to fill the gap. But here's the mathematical reality that cannot be escaped. Those stockpiles are finite. They have a bottom. And we're approaching it at an accelerating rate. The Silver Institute's own data, not conspiracy theories, not fringe analysis, their own official data, shows that identifiable above-ground silver stocks have declined by over 50% in the past decade alone. We're burning through the buffer, we're consuming the cushion, we're eating the seed corn, and there's no cavalry coming to the rescue. Why? Because you cannot simply ramp up silver production like flipping a switch. The geology is the geology. You can't create ore bodies that don't exist. The permitting takes years of regulatory review. The environmental studies, the community consultations, the legal challenges, years. The construction of a major mine takes years more. A silver deposit discovered today, if everything goes perfectly. If every permit is approved, if financing flows smoothly, won't produce meaningful commercial output until 2032 or 2033 at the earliest, more likely 2035. But the demand surge, the AI build-out, solar expansion, the electric vehicle revolution, that's happening now. That's accelerating with each new data center announcement, each new gigafactory breaking ground, each new solar installation connecting to the grid. The tipping point. And here's the first major revelation, the first moment that should fundamentally shift your understanding. We just crossed the critical threshold. The systematic draining of Western silver inventories has been underway for years, quietly, steadily, below the radar of mainstream financial analysis. But there's a point, a mathematical inevitability, where the drawdown becomes self-reinforcing, where the system passes the event horizon, where every ounce removed creates more urgency to remove the next ounce, where industrial users, seeing the shortage develop, begin to hoard defensively, where investors, watching premiums explode, rush to convert paper claims into physical metal before the conversion becomes impossible. We're there. We've crossed it. Friday's move, a 10% single-day spike in silver, was what statisticians call a 4 to 5 sigma event, a deviation from normal so extreme it should happen only once in decades, once in centuries. To put that in perspective, the probability of you personally being struck by lightning in your lifetime is approximately a 3.8 sigma event. What happened Friday was less likely than getting struck by lightning. You are witnessing history, but this isn't 1980. This isn't the Hunt brothers playing games with paper contracts. This time, the accumulation is physical, real metal, real tonnage, removed from the system permanently, locked in sovereign vaults that answer to no Western exchange, no Western regulator, no Western margin call. The structural deficit is locked in. The depletion is accelerating. And there is no quick fix. This is the anatomy of a strategic siege, and the siege has already begun. Now, let me show you why this matters far beyond the price of a shiny metal. Most people, even sophisticated investors, even Wall Street analysts, even government officials who should know better, think of silver as a precious metal, a commodity, something you stack in a safe for a rainy day, a hedge against inflation, a shiny coin your grandfather collected and passed down through generations. That's the old paradigm. That's a mental model from the 20th century. That's a relic of an era that no longer exists. In the 21st century, silver has become something entirely different, something far more critical, something that underpins the entire technological infrastructure of modern civilization. Silver is the linchpin commodity, the single point of failure for virtually every technology that defines the modern world. Remove it, restrict it, control it, and everything built on top of it begins to collapse. Let me walk you through the kill chain, industry by industry, domino by domino, because once you see how deep this dependency runs, you cannot unsee it. And you'll understand exactly why China has been executing this strategy with such precision and patience. The semiconductor, stranglehold. Every chip in every device on Earth requires silver, not as a luxury, not as a preference, not as one option among many alternatives, as an absolute, non-negotiable necessity. Silver possesses the highest electrical conductivity of any element on the periodic table. Period. Full stop. No qualifications. There's no substitute material that performs equivalently. Every connection point, every contact, every microscopic pathway in advanced semiconductor manufacturing relies on silver's unique physical properties. The global semiconductor industry generates over $600 billion in annual revenue, but its importance far exceeds that number. Semiconductors are the foundation of everything. Your phone, your laptop, your car's computer systems, the servers running AI models, the satellites orbiting overhead, the medical devices keeping hospital patients alive, the traffic systems managing your city, the banking networks processing your transactions, all of it, every single bit of it, depends on a steady, abundant, uninterrupted supply of silver. But here's what happens when that supply gets choked. When the nation that already dominates semiconductor packaging and assembly also controls the critical input material. You don't get a price increase that shows up in the next quarterly earnings report. You don't get a manageable supply chain challenge that procurement departments can work around. You get a production halt. Close your eyes and imagine this scenario. It's not hypothetical, it's the trajectory we're on. Apple calls TSMC to place their next chip order. Billions of dollars in semiconductors for the next iPhone generation. And TSMC responds, "We'd love to fulfill your order, but we can't source enough silver to run our fabrication lines at full capacity. Your order will be delayed by 6 months, maybe 12, maybe longer. We'll let you know when we know." What happens to Apple's stock price? What happens to the entire consumer electronics sector? And what happens to the trillions of dollars in market capitalization that depends on the assumption that chips will always be available? It evaporates. Overnight. The solar ceiling. The entire Western world has bet its energy future on solar power. Net zero commitments, Paris Agreement pledges, Green New Deal proposals, Inflation Reduction Act subsidies, trillions of dollars in planned investment. Every major economy on Earth has published detailed roadmaps showing solar as a cornerstone, often the cornerstone of their energy transition. Politicians have staked their careers on these commitments. Entire government agencies have been reorganized around them. International agreements have been signed, targets have been set, deadlines have been announced. But here's what those glossy government reports never mention. Here's the asterisk they hope you won't notice. Solar panels are extraordinarily silver intensive. Each standard photovoltaic panel requires approximately 20 grams of silver. The silver is essential for the electrical contacts that collect and conduct the generated current. Without sufficient silver, the panel doesn't work efficiently. Below a certain threshold, it doesn't work at all. 20 grams doesn't sound like much. A fraction of an ounce. Trivial. Until you scale it, until you multiply by millions, by billions. The solar industry currently consumes over 140 million ounces of silver annually. That's roughly 17% of total global silver production. And that number is projected to double or triple as the solar build-out accelerates toward those ambitious government targets. But here's the trap. The beautiful, devastating, perfectly designed trap. China manufactures over 80% of the world's solar panels. They've already cornered production. They control the factories. They control the technology. They control the supply chain from polysilicon to finished module. Now they're cornering the input material. If China controls both the manufacturing capacity and the raw material, the West's green energy transition doesn't happen on Western terms. It doesn't happen on the timeline Western governments have promised their voters. It doesn't happen at the price Western budgets have assumed. It happens on Beijing's terms, at Beijing's price, on Beijing's timeline, serving Beijing's strategic interests. Or it doesn't happen at all. Every net zero pledge, every climate summit commitment, every solar installation target, every green bond issued to finance the transition. All of it hostage to whoever controls the silver supply. The communications choke point. The next generation of wireless infrastructure requires silver at every critical node: 5G base stations, 6G antenna arrays, satellite communication terminals, connection points throughout the global network. The conductivity requirements for high-frequency transmission are dictated by physics, and silver is the only material that meets the specifications without unacceptable signal loss. The race to deploy advanced wireless networks isn't about teenagers downloading videos faster. That's the consumer marketing pitch. The real stakes are far higher. This race is about economic competitiveness in the digital age. It's about military communications that can't be jammed or intercepted. It's about who controls the infrastructure backbone of the entire global digital economy. Autonomous vehicles require instantaneous, ultra-reliable connectivity. A fraction of a second delay means a collision. Smart cities need mesh networks connecting millions of sensors and devices. Advanced manufacturing requires real-time data transmission for robotic systems. Remote surgery depends on zero-latency connections between surgeon and operating theater. The entire fourth industrial revolution, the transformation of every industry through digital technology, runs on wireless infrastructure. And that infrastructure runs on silver, right now. That race is being decided not in research laboratories or international standards committees or diplomatic negotiations. It's being decided in silver vaults, and the vaults are emptying. The defense dependency. Now we arrive at the dimension that should terrify every national security professional in the Western world. Every Tomahawk cruise missile contains silver components. Every F-35 fighter jet relies on silver in its avionics. Every satellite, every surveillance drone, every precision-guided munition, every piece of advanced military hardware the United States depends on for global power projection requires silver in its manufacturing. This isn't classified information. This is basic material science. This is documented in defense procurement specifications. The Pentagon knows this. Defense contractors know this. Anyone who's studied the bill of materials for advanced weapon systems knows this. That's why silver is being reclassified as a critical mineral. That's why there are quiet, urgent conversations happening in the Pentagon about supply chain vulnerabilities. That's why congressional committees are beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about strategic dependencies. But knowing about a problem and solving it are two entirely different things. The United States maintains no strategic silver reserve. Zero. We had one once, decades ago. The U.S. government held billions of ounces in strategic stockpiles, but we sold it off, liquidated it into the market, dispersed it across the globe. Gone. The domestic mines that could theoretically produce silver, they require a decade of development before producing meaningful output. The supply chains that could deliver silver from allied nations, they run through choke points that can be disrupted, sanctioned, blockaded, or captured. If a strategic adversary wanted to cripple U.S. military production capacity without firing a single shot, without risking a single soldier, without triggering Article 5 or any mutual defense treaty, how would they do it? Exactly like this. Control the material, drain the stockpiles, wait for the shortage to bite, watch your rival's military-industrial complex grind to a halt. The true targets. You see, this isn't about precious metals investors getting rich or getting poor. That's a sideshow. That's the retail entertainment version of a much more serious story. The small investors buying coins at their local dealer. The silver stackers accumulate ounces in their home safes. They're not the target. They're irrelevant to the strategic calculus. The target is Apple. Apple, whose entire product line depends on semiconductors that depend on silver. Apple, which sources the vast majority of its manufacturing from China. Apple, which just discovered that its supply chain has a single point of failure that no amount of financial engineering can fix. The target is Tesla. Tesla, whose electric vehicles require silver in battery connections, in control electronics, in solar roof integration. Tesla, which has bet everything on a technology transition that physically cannot happen without abundant silver supply. The target is the entire U.S. military-industrial complex. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, General Dynamics. Every defense contractor building the weapon systems that project American power across the globe, all of them dependent on supply chains that are being quietly, systematically strangled. The timeline weapon. And here's what makes this a perfect trap. The devastating asymmetry that transforms a commodity shortage into a strategic weapon. It takes 10 to 15 years to discover, permit, develop, finance, construct, and bring a major new silver mine into commercial production. That's the geological and regulatory reality in any serious jurisdiction. You cannot accelerate the timeline with money or political will. The ore bodies are where they are. The environmental reviews take as long as they take. The construction proceeds at the pace that physics allows, but the demand surge, the AI build-out, the solar expansion, the 5G deployment, the electric vehicle revolution, that's measured in months, quarters at most, annual product cycles. The demand is exploding now. The supply response cannot arrive for a decade or more. This gap This timeline mismatch is the weapon. China understands this perfectly. They've studied resource economics. They've mapped every bottleneck. They know exactly how long the West would need to respond. And they know that timeline is completely unacceptable for corporations operating on quarterly earnings cycles, for politicians facing election cycles, for militaries planning for near-term contingencies. The second revelation, and here's the second major revelation, the insight that separates those who see what's coming from those who will be blindsided. The true targets aren't retail investors. The true targets are the mega caps and national security. When Apple's next earnings call includes the phrase, silver supply constraints are limiting our production capacity. When Tesla announces vehicle delivery delays because they cannot source critical materials. When the Pentagon issues an emergency report on strategic mineral vulnerabilities, that's when the real panic begins. Not panic among silver stackers, they'll be celebrating. Panic in corporate boardrooms, panic in procurement departments, panic among the industrial consumers who suddenly realize they're competing for a shrinking pool of an irreplaceable resource against rivals, against governments, against sovereign wealth funds with unlimited budgets. Wait until the institutions arrive in the silver market. Wait until the manufacturers start hoarding. Wait until governments begin emergency strategic stockpiling, competing against each other, against corporations, against their own citizens for every available ounce. By that point, the silver won't be available at any price. It will already be locked away in Chinese vaults, already committed to Chinese industry, already removed from the global market permanently. The West will be standing at the counter, checkbook open, ready to pay anything, but the shelves will be bare, and the shopkeeper will be smiling from Beijing. Let me now synthesize everything we've discussed into a single, undeniable conclusion. This is not a market anomaly that will self-correct. This is not a supply chain disruption that logistics experts will resolve. This is not a temporary imbalance that will find equilibrium through normal price mechanisms. This is the deliberate, systematic, patient weaponization of a critical mineral, and the weapon has already been deployed. The trigger has already been pulled. The damage is already propagating through the system. Even if most people haven't felt it yet. Think about what we've established over the course of this video. The physical silver market is being drained at an accelerating rate. Hundreds of millions of ounces extracted from Western vaults, shipped east, locked away permanently. The paper market, that elaborate fantasy island of electronic promises, is diverging violently from physical reality. A chasm is opening between the official price and the real price, between fiction and truth. China and allied nations are accumulating real metal, atoms you can touch, weigh, and store, while the West trades fictional ounces back and forth in an endless digital shell game. The industries that define 21st century power, semiconductors, solar energy, advanced communications, weapon systems, all depend on a single input that is rapidly becoming unobtainable at any price. The timeline to develop new supply is measured in decades, but the timeline of the demand explosion is measured in months. Every single data point, every single trend line, every single piece of evidence points in one direction and one direction only. This was planned, not by accident, not by market forces, not by the invisible hand of supply and demand reaching natural equilibrium, by strategy, by foresight, by an adversary that thinks in decades while we think in quarters. The permanent repricing. And here's the peak revelation, the insight that separates those who understand what's coming from those who will be financially devastated by it. The coming price explosion will not be a bubble. It will not be a speculative mania that rises and crashes like 1980 or 2011. It will not follow the familiar pattern of euphoria followed by despair. It will be a permanent repricing of strategic necessity. This is a concept most investors don't understand because they've never lived through it. They've only known markets where commodities fluctuate around some normal price determined by production costs and demand curves. But when a commodity transitions from abundant to scarce, when it shifts from a market-traded good to a contested strategic resource, the old pricing models become worthless. The old charts become meaningless. The old assumptions become dangerous lies. What's the fair price for the last barrel of oil when your tanks sit empty and your enemy is advancing? What's the market rate for the final shipment of semiconductors when your factories are idle and your competitors are shipping products? What's the reasonable premium for the silver that determines whether your military can produce next-generation weapons or whether your soldiers go to war with obsolete equipment? The answer is simple and terrifying. Whatever the seller demands. We're not going back to normal. There is no normal to return to. The comfortable market structure that existed for the past 50 years. Paper prices set in New York and London. Physical metal flowing freely across borders. Abundant supply meeting predictable demand. That market is gone. It's already dead. We just haven't buried it yet. What's replacing it is something the modern financial world has never experienced. Something we haven't seen since the resource conflicts of the mid-20th century. A fractured, Geopolitical market, where access matters more than price, where relationships with producing nations supersede exchange-traded contracts, where bilateral deals between sovereigns replace transparent market mechanisms, where strategic reserves determine national survival. The old rules are dead, the old playbooks are worthless, and most market participants, most corporations, most investors, most governments don't even realize the game has fundamentally changed. The coming chaos. Let me map out what happens next. Not speculation, not prediction, pattern recognition based on how resource crises have unfolded throughout history. First, corporate panic. The industrial consumers, the Apples, the Teslas, the defense contractors, will suddenly realize their procurement departments have catastrophically failed them. They've been buying just in time, minimizing inventory costs, assuming supply would always be available at predictable prices. That assumption was their fatal error. They'll scramble to secure forward contracts at any price. They'll attempt to lock in supply for years ahead. They'll hoard whatever inventory they can acquire, pulling even more metal out of the available market. But they'll be competing against each other, against sovereign nations with unlimited budgets, against every other industrial consumer on Earth who just woke up to the same terrifying reality. The scramble will accelerate the shortage. Hoarding begets hoarding. Fear feeds fear. Panic becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The price spiral becomes a vortex that sucks in everything around it. Second, failed government intervention. Washington will convene emergency committees. Blue ribbon panels will be appointed. Reports will be commissioned. Hearings will be held. Politicians will make speeches about securing critical supply chains and reducing strategic dependencies. They'll announce initiatives to rebuild strategic stockpiles, but they'll discover, too late, that stockpiling requires available supply, and the supply isn't available. Not at any price, not in any quantity that matters. They'll consider export controls on domestic production. But what do you restrict when domestic production covers only a fraction of domestic demand? They'll explore emergency mining permits, fast-track approvals, regulatory waivers. But the mines won't produce for a decade no matter how many permits you issue. You can't legislate geology. You can't regulate ore bodies into existence. Every tool in the policy toolkit assumes abundant supply that can be redirected, rationed, or prioritized. When the supply doesn't exist, when the stockpiles are empty, when the vaults have been drained, the tools are useless. The policy levers connect to nothing. Third, the emergence of shadow markets. When official channels cannot deliver, unofficial channels emerge. This is an iron law of economics that no government has ever successfully repealed. Gray markets will develop, black markets will flourish, metal will trade outside regulated exchanges, beyond the visibility of Western regulators and tax authorities. Prices will be quoted in private transactions that never appear on any public ticker. We're already seeing the early stages. Dealers quoting prices above the official spot. Physical metal trading at premiums that dwarf historical norms. Transactions arranged off exchange, settled in cash, invisible to the financial system. This bifurcation will accelerate explosively. There will be an official price, the paper fiction on the comics, and there will be the real price that actual buyers pay for actual metal. Those two numbers will diverge until the paper price becomes an irrelevant fiction that serious participants simply ignore. Fourth, the acceleration of global fracture. The silver crisis will accelerate the division of the world into competing blocks. This process is already underway, but the resource dimension will supercharge it. One block, centered on China, Russia, and aligned nations, will have access to physical resources, real commodities, strategic materials, industrial capacity built on secure supply chains. The other block, the West and its traditional partners, will have paper claims, financial instruments, and printing presses, promises, theories, abstractions. Trade will reorganize around resource access rather than comparative advantage or historical relationships. Alliances will shift based on who can deliver physical commodities, not on who shares political values or democratic institutions. The post-World War II international order, already crumbling under its own contradictions, will fragment along resource lines. A new world will emerge, harder, more transactional, more zero-sum. This isn't deglobalization. That's too passive a word. This is reglobalization. A new order where physical control of strategic materials determines national power, national prosperity, and national survival. The warning shot. And here's where I need you to understand the full scope of what's unfolding. Silver is the warning shot. But it's not the only bullet in the chamber. It's not even the largest caliber. If China can execute this strategy with silver, if they can drain Western stockpiles, corner global supply, and weaponize a critical input, what stops them from doing the same thing with other strategic materials? Copper, essential for every electrical application, required for the entire energy transition, already facing projected deficits of millions of tons annually. already dominated by Chinese refining and processing capacity. The same playbook is already running. Lithium, the backbone of battery technology, critical for electric vehicles and grid-scale storage, already concentrated in a handful of producing nations, several of which are falling into China's economic orbit, already subject to strategic accumulation and long-term supply agreements that lock Western companies out. Rare earth elements, required for permanent magnets in wind turbines and electric motors, essential for guided missiles and precision munitions, already controlled overwhelmingly, over 90%, by Chinese mining and processing. Already weaponized in previous trade disputes as a demonstration of capability. Uranium, the fuel for nuclear reactors. The energy source that everyone suddenly realizes we need for AI data centers. Already facing supply constraints after decades of underinvestment. Already subject to Russian export dominance that recent sanctions have awkwardly highlighted. Cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite, antimony, gallium, germanium. The list goes on. The playbook repeats. The vulnerability is systemic. The strategy that's working with silver can be applied to every critical mineral the modern economy requires. And once you understand the pattern, once you see it clearly, you recognize it everywhere. The final question. So I'll leave you with this. The war for physical resources has begun. Not a hypothetical future war that think tanks write papers about. Not a war that might happen if tensions escalate further. Not a scenario for strategic planners to game out. A war that is being fought right now, today. While the financial news talks about interest rates and earnings reports and stock buybacks, while most people remain utterly, dangerously oblivious. The silver disappearance is not a market anomaly. It's not a statistical outlier. It's not a temporary disruption. It's a blueprint, a proof of concept, a demonstration that the West's technological civilization can be systematically undermined through patient, strategic resource control, without firing a shot, without triggering a military response, without creating the kind of dramatic headlines that force populations to pay attention. And the question you need to answer, the question that will determine your financial future, your family's security, and perhaps your nation's trajectory, is devastatingly simple. What do you own that they might need to take off the market next? What physical assets do you actually control? Not paper claims, not electronic entries, not promises from counterparties that may or may not be able to deliver when delivery matters most. What tangible resources are in your possession? Resources that can't be margin called, can't be defaulted on, can't be devalued by a keystroke in some distant financial center? What is your exposure to a system that is being systematically dismantled by strategic rivals who understand resource warfare far better than we do? Who've studied history? Who've learned its lessons? Who are now applying those lessons while we sleepwalk toward catastrophe? The people who recognized the China shock early, who understood what the silver drain meant before the mainstream financial media caught up, before the official reports were published, before the emergency committees were convened. They're positioned on the right side of history. Everyone else is about to learn a very expensive lesson, a lesson that will cost them money at minimum, perhaps much more. The shelves are emptying, the vaults are draining, the siege is underway. The only question that remains is this: which side of the wall will you be standing on when the gates finally close? Silver is the first domino, but it will not be the last, and when the next one falls, you'll want to understand why. You'll want to see it coming before it hits. You'll want to be positioned on the right side of history. The answers aren't hidden in the future. They're written in the patterns of the past. And I'll show you exactly where to look. So consider subscribing because this is just the beginning.